In other news, Oxfam has released reports saying the mega rich will recoup COVID-19 losses in record time, yet billions will live in poverty for at least a decade. The study says the 1,000 richest people on the planet recouped their COVID-19 losses within just 9 months. But it could take more than a decade for the world's poorest to recover from the economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. The report, titled The Inequality Virus, was released on the opening day of the World Economic Forum's Davos agenda. To speak to us about this is Eskom's Executive Director of Oxfam South Africa. Very good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Very good evening, and thank you for having me.
Okay, so let's first start with, why will it take 14 times longer for the number of people living in poverty to return to pre-pandemic levels than it took for the fortunes of top 1,000, mostly white male billionaires, to bounce back?
Well, the reason it will take the majority of our people's world more than nearly a decade and more to recover from COVID is because we have an unjust economic system that for the longest time has enabled the situation where only 1% of people in our world are able to own more than 50%. This economic system is the one that that makes it possible for the super rich and for rich corporations to pay workers, slave wages, to exploit workers, and to accumulate the wealth, majority of the wealth for themselves, and to avoid paying tax, which are critical to the agenda of helping the most vulnerable to lift out of poverty and recover from this pandemic.
We'll talk about taxes in just a moment and the role they can play in alleviating the situation. But I found this interesting, and I think it's important for all of us to understand, how is the economic system rigged to enable the super rich elite to amass wealth in the middle of the worst recession?
Yeah, so I mean, some of the ways, and we have described this before, so this is no mystery under COVID. In fact, everything that has happened in terms of the, deepened inequalities under COVID, we could have predicted, because we knew that under the, the neoliberal capitalist system that we have, it is possible for people, for the majority of the profits from what's being produced in the world to accumulate to a few. It is possible for the super rich to get away with owning the world's people. And we've seen the statistics, 70% of unpaid taxes. It is possible for, the super rich and their corporations to pay their CEOs, 74 times more than it would take for a nurse in South Africa, for instance, to earn in an entire year. And so, and it is possible, and under this system, it is possible for the super rich, of course, to be the ones who determine policy. It is possible for governments to rather bail out the super rich and banks than invest, in money into public services that will provide the social protection needed, by the most vulnerable people. And so we've got to change this system. It is untenable. It is going to continue to destroy our world.
Right, let me jump in because we are running
it is
out of
possible
time
to change it.
Let me jump in because we are running out of time. So naturally, in this patriarchal system, then the heaviest toll of this pandemic would then fall onto people of color and women. So what are the figures? How badly have they been affected?
So we know that, for instance, some of the worst affected people, are those who are mostly in low-paid and precarious professions, the majority of whom are women. We know for a fact that, 112 million women would no longer be at high risk of losing their incomes or jobs, if we had, a good system. We know that in the case of South Africa, the majority of the jobs lost last year, for instance, of the more than 3 million jobs lost, the majority of those were jobs that belonged to women, because women occupy the more precarious jobs. And of course, we know that all of this inequality, and we know this to be true in South Africa, the poorest people are Black in this country, and the people who own the majority of the country's wealth are white. And so these inequalities are race and gendered. And it's important that in addressing the situation, we change, these fault lines.
Do we have a figure of that in South Africa? Because you talk about, for instance, the Afro-descendants in Brazil, how 40% of those are affected, and the number is obviously disproportionately large in the US as well. When we get our figures, we don't really get a sense of who is affected when it comes to COVID-19, the number of infections and deaths. Do we have a figure for that for South Africa?
Well, we have old figures. We have established figures for South Africa. We know that, the top 10%, of wealth owners in this country, are white. We know that the majority of people who lost jobs, last year and who will continue to be plunged into poverty are Black. We know that, and in our case, are Black women. We know that, the top 10% in this country owns the wealth, who are mostly white, own the wealth, of 50%, of our countries, at the people at the bottom, 50%. And so we know the situation, to be true in South Africa, that it is Black women who are shouldering the burden of the epidemic. It is going to be Black women who are needing to show up to take care, of the social reproductive responsibility in a context where governments are paying less and less in public services.
It's such a pity that we have run out of time.
We know that it is Black women, who are who are losing jobs. And so this is not different for South Africa. And in fact, South Africa's inequality has these very particular features of being race and gendered.
But we have run out of time, and it's a huge report with very many salient points, including the fact that 2/3 of your respondents say that they don't trust their government's efforts. So we hopefully will discuss it with you at some point. Ms. Sipho Mthathi is the Executive Director of Oxfam South Africa.